Okay, hello everyone. This is our next lecture in our series on New Testament Greek, and we are looking at just one chapter tonight. A lot of these lectures we look at two chapters. Tonight we're just looking at one, so a little lighter fare tonight. But we're looking at autos, which means he, and we're going to talk about three different uses of autos in Greek. So just as a sort of a way of a reminder or review, when you look at the personal pronoun, the third person personal pronoun in English, you have the subjective singular, he, she, or it. You have the possessive singular, which means possession, like you own something, his, her, its. And then you have the objective singular, him, her, it. And then obviously the plural. Plural is a little easier to remember in English because it's subjective they, possessive their, and objective them. So that's our version of autos, if you will, in English. But that's how we do third personal pronouns in English. So here's the singular of autos. You can see the masculine, the feminine, and the neuter. So across the top, so autos would be masculine nominative, alte would be feminine nominative, and alpo or alta would be neuter nominative. And then going down, you have nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative, just like you do in your main noun declension. Here is, or in your main noun paradigm. So here's the plural. You can see there altoi, alte, alta, and then nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. So here's how you would translate each of those into English. I'm just going to toggle really quickly, like take a mental picture of this. He, she, or it, his, her, its, to him, to her, to it, him, her, it. That's what you're going to find similar to this paradigm. So in the Greek, when autos appears in the nominative, is typically going to be the subject. Not always, right? But typically you're going to find it in the subjective, he, she, or it. Al to, altes, altu, that is in the genitive. Now we've talked about this before. In the genitive, you could say of his, of her, of its. You don't have to. In fact, it makes a lot of sense to just use his, her, its, because of his is really kind of redundant. And then because we're working in Greek with the dative case, alto, alte, alto, to or for him, to her, to or for her, to or for it. And of course, the accusative, which is in the objective case, usually him, her, or it. That's your singular and plural. It's going to be translated just like you translate it in English. You can see the paradigm there for the plural, and it's just going to be in the nominative case, they, whether there's not going to be a gender distinction in the plural. Nominative is going to be they, genitive, their, possessive, that's their house. And then altois, altes, and altois, who are for them, altus, altas, alta, them. So they, their, to them, and them. And this is just a paradigm that you're going to have to memorize as you move forward. But autos is pretty easy to pick out of a sentence. You're already memorizing the noun paradigm. And so you can see the form that autos takes. It's going to be pretty easily recognizable. Now, there are three uses. That was the title of this lecture, three uses for autos in Greek. The first use is what we've just been talking about, third person personal pronoun. So the case is determined by its function in the sentence. That should sound similar to what we've talked about with like adjectives. And then in possession, like in the genitive case, typically you'll see autos will follow the noun. So look here. That is to anima, the name, and that's in the genitive. So you would say of me, the name of me, which doesn't make any sense. But that's not how you would say it in English. So you would translate that my name. So case is determined by how the word is used in the sentence, whether it's the subject or whether it's a direct object or whatever. The gender and the number is determined by the noun that it modifies or its antecedent. And you're just going to follow the natural gender, him, her, where you're going to run into some, not issues, but where you're going to have to make some decisions with the way you translate. For instance, you can see at the bottom of this slide, and you can just go to page 123 as a reference to this, but you can see here like the word cosmos. Cosmos is a masculine noun, but which means world. You typically would not refer to a world as he. You would refer to in English world as it. So those are just some translation keys. So if it doesn't make sense in English, then what you want to do in Greek is you want to use your translation needs to follow the natural gender that it would follow in English. So autos can function as a third person personal pronoun. Autos can also be used as what we call an adjectival intensive. It's an adjective that is intensive. So the example given here is ho David autos. So literally that sentence, the literal translation is the David he. Now that doesn't make any sense if you just translate it the David he. But when autos follows a noun in this way, then we call it an adjectival intensive. And you're going to translate it himself, herself, itself. So ho David autos is translated David himself. So when this happens, the autos is when it functions as an intensive, autos is going to agree in case, number, and gender with the noun it modifies. You would not see ho David autes, right? It's ho David autos because David is a masculine noun. Normally, what you're going to find is that it is modifying the subject. So you're typically going to find it in the nominative case. And it's normally in the predicate position. And that's just to say that it's typically, not always, but typically it's going to follow the subject. So in this sentence, David is the subject. So you have, if you break a sentence down into two parts, you have a subject and a predicate, right? Then you've got all the various parts of a predicate, like you might have a prepositional phrase or you might have a direct object. But if you just look at a sentence in two parts as a subject and a predicate, you're typically going to find that the adjectival intensive is going to be in the predicate position. So it's going to follow the noun. Not always, but sometimes. But it's worth noting, if you look at page 124, what you don't want to do, and we're in about, it's the section right above 12.11. And I don't think you're going to have any trouble with this because you're going to be able to tell the difference between an adjective and and when autos is kind of acting like an intensive adjective. So here's the differences. So if you see on page 124, if you're not there, go ahead and pause the recording and go to 124. Right above section 12.11, you see ho Jesus agathos, right? Literally translated is the Jesus good, right? You don't say the Jesus because the article is there just to announce that we have a proper noun. So you're going to drop the article. Jesus, good. Well, we learned that when you have a an adjective that follows a noun in this way, you are going to insert the to be verb. And in this case, you would insert the to be verb he is or is. And so you would translate this sentence, Jesus is good, right? See, you added the to be verb. But in the next example that Dr. Mounce has for us, autos ho Jesus, you've got he, the Jesus. It doesn't make any sense in English, but because you see that autos um, is modifying Jesus in this case, then it would just be Jesus himself. So it's intensive. So when you're translating the sentence, if you're finding that autos, the personal pronoun, if you're finding that if you were to translate it, he, she, it, they, them, it doesn't make any sense. That's when you back up to this rule and you ask yourself, how is it functioning in the sentence? Is it modifying a noun? And does the pronoun does autos appear in the nominative case? In this case, it does. You can see autos, which is in the nominative case, he, and it modifies Jesus. So just one of those rules you have to learn, but it's not, as far as rules go in Greek, it's not a hard rule because typically, if you're translating along and you recognize the pronoun and you translate it he, she, it, them, their, whatever, which typically it would be he, she, or it because it'd be in the nominative case. But it doesn't really make any sense. But if you apply the rule and you apply the intensive himself, herself, itself, okay, got it. So don't think too hard about this. Just file it among the many rules you're having to learn. Memorize the paradigms, and you're going to be fine. Here's some examples of the adjectival intensive. We just covered this first one, ho Jesus autos, Jesus himself. Here's an example that I mentioned earlier where you use cosmos. So ho, cosmos, autos, the world itself. The reason we're translating autos as itself rather than himself is because in English, cosmos would not be masculine. World is not masculine. World is an it. Here is an instance, two instances where, or one instance where you see that autos precedes the noun. Alte, hey, ecclesia. So her, the church. Well, that doesn't really make any sense. So you would say the church herself, but then the church is not masculine or feminine, even though it's a feminine word, because in English, you would say the church itself. And then the final there, you've got you, he, Lego from I say, you are saying. And I know you haven't learned that present active indicative yet for that verb, but that is you are saying. Or you say is probably a better way. Present active indicative, and you'll learn that. But so that doesn't make any sense. You, he, you say, right? So in this instance, the pronoun autos is modifying you. So you yourself are saying is how you would translate that. So that's just an example of autos intensely modifying, like bringing special attention. You yourself, he himself, the church itself. So the third way that autos can appear in Greek is it can mean the same, meaning literally the same. So you've got an example here, ton, auton, logon. right? So if you were to literally translate this word, um, you would have the accusative case, right? So it's not in the nominative case. So you wouldn't really translate it himself, herself, itself, right? Um, it's in the it's in the accusative case. So you would say literally the him word. That doesn't make any sense. But because Alton is in the accusative case and it is modifying logon, it's appearing between, you can see between the article and the noun, the same thing. You can see the next one below it, in the same hour. And if you're looking for maybe a better explanation than I just gave, look on 12.12 on page 125, and Mounce gives a really good explanation. You're not going to see this a ton. It does show up some, right? You can probably think of a few verses where in that same hour um, is kind of a phrase you might hear in the New Testament. But you just remember that it's not very common, but it's going to be in the accusative case. Usually, the case number and gender are going to be in the attributive case, and so you would just have to learn. You might have to, when you see Alton or Altos in the accusative case, you might have to translate it a couple of different ways. And if the first most common way doesn't make sense, where you use just he, she, it, them, they, that sort of thing, that doesn't make sense, then you start applying the other two rules if you can't remember the rule itself. But if it's in the nominative case, a lot of times, okay, it's going to mean himself, herself, or itself. But now we've got it in the attributive case, so it's going to mean the same. And that's it for the for the rules. Here's a quick summary slide that you can pause and kind of get a feel for what we just did. Now, this is a really quick lecture, right? So um, we're not covering a whole bunch of new ground, but let's go ahead and look at your vocabulary words for for this week. So ion means age or eternity. You'll learn this later, but when you see in the New Testament forever and ever, or forever, forever is ace tone ion, into the eternity or into the age. And so it's kind of in my opinion, it's kind of one of the more beautiful phrases that you see in Greek. Ace tone ion means into the age or forever. So ion means age or eternity. Didaskalos, this means teacher. So if you've ever done any teaching before and you've heard the term didactic to refer to teaching, that's where we get the word didactic from didaskalos, which means teacher. It's a masculine noun. Euthus or euthus means immediately. Notice that rough breathing mark there. Hus means until, or in the genitive, as far as. Mathetes, mathetes means disciple. Man means either on the one hand or indeed. Medes, no one or no thing. Medes, medemia, medan. Monos means alone. Think mono, one. Just not a great way to remember that, but because it doesn't mean one, it means alone. But if you think about it, or think if you had mono, then you have to be alone because nobody wants to be around you. Maybe think about it that way. All right, see the rough breathing mark there. Hopos means how or in order that. We got another rough breathing mark. So we have hasas, as great as, or as many as. Un, therefore. If you ophthalmos, think ophthalmology, eye or sight, ophthalmos. Halen means again. Hus, podos means foot. If you've ever been to a podiatrist is a foot doctor. So hus, podos. And last, we see a rough breathing mark there. Hooper. In the genitive, it means in behalf of. I think that's a. I think that's a. I have to look that up. That may be a typo in the slides that Dr. Mounce provides us. He's got in behalf of in the book, and I thought maybe he meant on behalf of, but it means in behalf of. I just want to make sure I didn't get it wrong when I typed it in. Or in the accusative, it means above. If you want to remember the accusative, if you're playing basketball and playing hoops, you're shooting the ball above your head. So in the accusative, hooper means above. All right, so that is chapter 12. And if you're following along in the course for credit, you know that after this lecture and after these workbook assignments, you have your first exam. And so this was as far as the lessons that we've had up to this point. I think this has been pretty easy. Just remember some of those rules about Altos. Learn to recognize it, and I think you'll be fine. So I'll stop sharing here. And thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you the next time.